The Bitcoin and crypto haters, they all eventually capitulate. They've had their time in the sun. They continue to say all kinds of crazy things. They continue to say that Bitcoin is invaluable. They continue to talk about how cryptocurrencies won't be sustainable. Well, ultimately, what we have seen time and time and time again is that the most vocal critics end up learning more. They end up doing more work, and they ultimately end up becoming some of the biggest Bitcoin proponents. Here's the latest example. DHH, David Heinemeier Hansen. He's the co-founder and CTO of Basecamp. He's the creator of Ruby on Rails. He's a best-selling author, and he has been an incredibly vocal Bitcoin critic. He's had Twitter war after Twitter war after Twitter war with the Bitcoin community. He's talked about how it's not valuable, how it uses too much energy, how he doesn't understand why it will still last in the future. But recently, the events in Canada have changed DHH's mind. All of a sudden this morning, we saw a tweet come out where he said, "I still can't believe that this is the protest that would prove every Bitcoin crank a profit. And for me to have to slice a piece of humble pie and admit that I was wrong on crypto's fundamental necessity in Western democracies." Now, before we take too much of a victory lap, let's see exactly what DHH was talking about. Well, in his piece, he says that he's been skeptical about Bitcoin and the rest of the crypto universe, and that in the early 2010s, some of his most ferocious Twitter battles have been with that community. And he still believes that there's a lot to oppose. He inaccurately says that Bitcoin's grotesque energy consumption, or that there's ridiculous transaction fees, or low throughput, or obvious frauds in stablecoins, etc. But he does say that his bigger beef was actually fueled by a lack of imagination. He could see the fundamental promise of a digital currency free of banks if you were living in a failing state like Venezuela, or an overtly authoritarian one like China or Iran. But how is this relevant to the vast number of Bitcoin boosters living in stable Western democracies? As he goes deeper and deeper into the piece, what he starts to talk about is that his eyes were opened by what the Canadian government has done. He now believes that the Canadian government is also pursuing an authoritarian strategy as well. And so now he recognizes why Bitcoin as a freedom technology is important both in the developing and in the developed world as well. One thing that DHH made that I thought was really interesting is he said it actually took Trudeau in Canada to do this. Because if it had been Trump in America, a lot of people around the world, including those in Europe, wouldn't have taken it as seriously. They simply would have written it off as just one president in the United States for a short period of time. But everyone believes that Canada is a liberal democracy. They believe that Justin Trudeau was actually somewhat of a centrist. But now we're seeing that if it can happen in Canada, it can happen anywhere. And so I think we've got to give kudos to DHH for recognizing the true value proposition of Bitcoin and having the intellectual humility to change his mind, to talk about it publicly. But ultimately, what he saw is what millions and millions of people around the world have seen as well, is that the Canadian government is running a marketing campaign for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is freedom technology. It's censorship resistance. It prevents an authoritarian government from overreaching, from encroaching on your personal liberties. Bitcoin is inevitable. Bitcoin is good for business. And every single Bitcoin hater is eventually going to figure out that they need Bitcoin as well. So whether you're a politician, whether you're just a talking head on Twitter, or you're an entrepreneur or an investor, start doing your homework, because ultimately you're going to need Bitcoin.